For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast, or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host Jade Black, and today we're doing something a little different, and this episode was inspired by a very good friend of mine called Patrick Scott, who's got a couple of books out. I'll link to those in the description. Absolutely wonderful person. You should absolutely check him out. And he asked a writing question recently about what emotion you're drawn to as a writer in your characters and what makes you want to write a story. And at first I didn't really think very much of this. And once I started to understand what the question actually meant, I realised that with the determined ones, there is a profound anger under the surface with all of them, and that is, at the end of the day, one of their main driving forces. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, I should spend some time talking about this on the podcast, so here I am. What I'm going to do with this episode is basically take you through my thought process that it took to realise what this is and sort of explain as I go. So I want to talk first about the starting points of each book. I've talked before in a couple of episodes about how I sometimes start in the wrong place, but it's more about what sort of causes... I don't want to say the inciting incident because I hate the phrase the inciting incident and I think it's bullshit, but I think that's for another episode. But it's almost like the moment at which something snaps and that drive becomes something else. So I want to first talk about Hanzo, and we have to start a little bit here with Hanzo's backstory, because Hanzo ended up going into politics when he was 16 to support his family. Politics paid well, so that's where he went. But Snakebite doesn't start until Hanzo is 20, and the reason it doesn't start until then is because when Hanzo entered politics, it was purely for the money. He didn't really have much of a care for actual politics and, governance and running a nation and all of that. But having worked in politics for a while and watching, people just not do what they should be doing, not actually taking care of the country and taking care of citizens, this anger builds in him. And it builds and it builds until, he hits age 20 and he's like, you know what, fuck this, I'll fix it because nobody else is. And that's the point, that's the profound anger that's just there for Hanzo constantly. He can't stand watching it, so he makes his stand. And it's a similar thing with Ai. He joins politics in his mid-20s, but his project doesn't start, Black Executioner doesn't start until he's 39. And again, there is an incident that I'm not going to talk about exactly because it is a spoiler, but one particular thing happens, and all this, stuff he's been campaigning for, and it's almost there, and he's been doing it all sort of the legal, in air quotes, right way. And he realises that with this one thing that happens, it's not gonna work anymore. So, he gets, it's 13 years of his life and all this effort and somebody else's, effort as well, that's wasted, and the anger from that. It's like, well, fuck you, I'll start my illegal campaign then and get it done. And Curtis is actually another really good example because his project is very different to a lot of the other determined ones. He's a child. Like, he's literally like 13, 14 at the start of Amber Shackles, which is the age of Major and Malasau is 14, which is insane, and everybody's aware of it, but that is how it is. But Curtis is, for all intents and purposes to us, he's a child. And he sort of realizes when he hits that age, and actually, yeah, I can take the throne now, I'm so old enough to rule. I actually need to learn how to do that then. And again, there's this profound anger that why haven't I, been taught this as, the heir to the throne? And that spurs him on to do what he does at that point in his life. It's all anger, and this is true for all of the other determined ones, but I think those three are probably the clearest example of exactly what I'm talking about, in the sense that they have been in these situations for not an insignificant length of time, but it's the build-up of the anger and how that carries them throughout the rest of the book. What this anger is to them is it's constantly quietly simmering, it's constantly there, because the whole premise of each Determined One book basically is that there's a problem no one's fixing. So, and these people get very angry about it, decide to fix it, and the book doesn't end until it's done. That's very loosely what it is. There's a lot more to it than just that, but that is the basics of it. A lot of this actually stems from incompetence, particularly in the case of Hanzo and Curtis, because with Hanzo it is pure incompetence that these people just cannot run a country to save their lives. And that incompetence, and seeing how useless everybody else is, that is the thing for him that makes him so angry. He just decides, alright, well, I'll basically upend my life and do it myself then. And upend a nation while I'm at it too, because that sounds like fun. He's terrible. And again, with Curtis, it is profound incompetence that, he is the heir to the throne. He doesn't have siblings. He's the one, and no one has taught him how to handle being, a king when that happens, because, his parents aren't going to live forever. So, he might not take the throne until, in theory, he's 50, but no one's thought that actually, yeah, you are old enough now, and you might have to be a regent or something, should something happen, but no one's actually going to teach you how to do that, and how to handle that. Like, what is that? And also a lot of it stems from history as well, and this is the more human rights side of the Determined Ones. It's a history and seeing other people set precedents. The whole thread with the Determined Ones for a long time is that in Hyukai, being gay is illegal. This was not always the case in Hyukai. And so basically, something happened during the downfall, and then it was. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, because then we do get into spoiler territory. But this is events in history that contribute to this anger, and some people, Haru is aware of this, probably. Someone like Coney isn't, in the same way. But regardless, Haru as a young man sees Malasel change the law so that, it's no longer an issue in Malasel. And, that precedent's then been set, but nobody really follows through with that until the Era do. There's another precedent set. And then again, no one really does anything. So he's like, okay, but this has happened within my lifetime, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. When are we gonna... And he just gets angrier and angrier over time. And you do actually see it with Haru, that he really does get quite angry later in his life. So, that's actually a really nice segue to talk about when this anger is seen. Let's keep on Haru. And I think the first time you really see it in Mr. Nakagami, I'm not going to spoil anything, don't worry. Haru tries to make a very specific law change that is a bit of a minefield, but would save a lot of lives. And it doesn't go through because of, effectively, lack of... It doesn't go through, but... And this is by the time Haru and I are working together. And Haru immediately is like, okay, so what do we do to make this happen? And I just tells him, look, there are circumstances around this. The reasons this hasn't gone through, that's not going to change. Regardless of what we do, we're wasting our time. And Haru gets really angry with him for that. I think that's probably the first time you see it. But then when you get towards the end of Mr. Nakagami, where Haru's in his 50s, there are a couple of moments where you really see how angry he gets. You know, there is one person he almost yells at, like, genuinely, and there's another one who he, threatens. Haru is... He's just so... It's not frustration, it is just straight up anger at that point, that, like, why are we still having to deal with this nonsense when other people across the land have seen sense at this point? With Hanzo's an interesting one because you almost get the inverse with him. He is very much, at the start of Snakebite, he's an angry young man. He is. He's not afraid to waltz into the Chief Treasurer's office while the Chief Treasurer's in a meeting, slam a binder in front of him and just scream in his face. He will do that. He is an asshole. He doesn't care. But the older he gets, he doesn't do that anymore. It's partly because his vocal cords end up damaged. So, yelling isn't as easy for him to do. But, he does still go into people's offices uninvited and threaten them. He does still do that, which is probably a surprise to a subtotal of 0 people. But he gets more quiet about his scheming, and you can tell a lot of it's driven by anger, because, even just in offhanded one-liners about, okay, well, this guy's, done something really dumb, what do we do? And Hanzo's like, oh, I've got a file on him, take your pick, Jiro, have fun. And it's like, okay. Where did you get that from? Actually, no, don't answer that. Helga is another interesting one, this one, because she is an angry person. Like, there's no doubt about that. She has one hell of a temper. But this profound anger that drives her, this driving anger comes at different times for her. It can often look like anger at being disrespect when people don't do things, the way she asks or when she asks or and there is definitely an element of that, but it runs deeper in this fact that actually she's just furious that the international community aren't helping Safiorovic when they could actually really do with a hand. So to her it's more just, well, we got nowhere to turn but ourselves, and even we won't help ourselves. And it's harder to spot with her, but it is very much there. It's not just that she's an angry person, though she definitely is. There is a much deeper, tone to a lot of it. Curtis and Shinichi are slightly different with this profound anger, because again, it's a lot harder to spot. I think, especially with Shinichi, until a couple of conversations towards the end of Shadow on the Snow, but with those two, you see it in a couple of the decisions they make, and with Shinichi that actually happens quite early, in the sense that they make decisions that are very wrathful, and they don't hesitate to do that, and they don't struggle with it afterwards. Very wrathful, very brutal, very, tough decisions. And they just do it without really thinking when it applies to certain scenarios, certain people. They just, well, if this person needs to die, they need to die. I'll kill them myself if I have to. Coney is, I think, a particularly unique case in this one, because with Coney, again, it's not... He is quite angry at times. He is a bit of an angry young man at times, but with him, it more manifests as just being incredibly stubborn and incredibly unwilling to listen to things he really should listen to, honestly, because the whole thing with Coney is that he feels robbed. He feels robbed of just living, you know, a normal life, you know, a life that he deserves to live, where, you know, he can just, I think partly career progression does bother him a bit, because the career ladder is a bit clogged. But just, you know, being able to find someone to love and have kids and, you know, just live without being terrified of being executed at any given moment. And he feels robbed of that, and robbed of, you know, being able to just do things. So when people tell him, you know, when he gets injured, actually you need to, you know, not do things, you know, stay home and rest, and, you know, things that you should do when you are injured that, you know, none of the determined ones are very good at. But Coney's particularly bad because subconsciously to him it's like, well, I already can't fucking do anything, which I think is probably also partly restrictions of working in politics and not wanting to be seen doing certain things. But, you know, there is already rather a lot he can't do. And the things he wants to do often involve, you know, moving around, going into the neutral zone at the least. So if someone tells him, no, you have to stay home and rest, and he's like, well, no, fuck that. You know, I've got one thing that, you know, I like doing, so I'm going to do the thing, especially when I feel like shit because, you know, I'm in pain or this or that. And he just doesn't listen. And a lot of that is very subconscious for him, but that is what it is. That's how that anger manifests with him. And over time, it does get worse. People do get angrier, and I talked about this particularly with Haru. But, you know, a lot of these projects take place over quite a long period of time. I mean, Black Executioner, I think, is the shortest at, you know, around about 6-9 months, something like that. But, you know, Mr. Nakagami and Snakebite are 37 years, give or take. Especially with Haru. You know, 37 years of trying to get, you know, basic human rights. It's just ridiculous to him. It is just... there becomes a point where he just can't fathom how this conversation is still being had and why the issue hasn't been resolved. He just stops being able to fathom it, and you can't really blame him. And with Hanzo, you know, I've mentioned he is a very angry young man. Like, very angry, to the point of, I'm not really sure how you didn't get, you know, imprisoned for that, Hanzo, like, low-key. But, you know, for a period in the middle, he gets a bit better because he's in charge. And, you know, then things happen. And, you know, they're done right. Then when he changes role, things for Hyukai do get significantly worse again. And that is the thing that really gets to him later in life. It's just, well, I showed you how to do it. Times were better. Were they perfect? No, absolutely not. But, you know, we had better. I did better. We all know that better is possible. But you're just so incompetent, and that you aren't doing that. You're actively making things worse for literally no reason. And it's just, again, it's not fathomable to him. It's just like, well, why would you do that, though? What do you gain from doing that? You're making the country less stable, making everyone worse off, making us look dumb on the... Like, what's the point of that? Why are you doing that? And as seen on stage, I mean, Isamu... I would never call Isamu an angry person. Never. And the whole sort of opening of As Seen on Stage actually opens on a bit of a gag because Isamu's a jazz musician. And it opens round about his 28th birthday. And the gag is, I'm a musician, I made it past 27. This is a shocker. And, up until that point, Isamu spends a long time trying to find his feet, and maybe he's a little superstitious and does actually think he's going to die at 27 because a lot of people around him are. But once he starts to realise that actually, no, I'm doing well and actually things are pretty stable. My life is pretty good at the minute. He starts to look around him a bit more and realise that actually the people around him are doing significantly worse than they once were. And again, it's sort of gradual decline, so it's a little hard to notice until you look for it, but it's what was once subconscious becomes conscious, and he's like, hang on a minute. And he sees certain issues that, aren't being dealt with, and the anger of the Hyukis, and trying to, keep that contained. And again, As Seen on Stage is one of the longer ones, but also shorter, 15 years, roughly. But over time, again, he gets more and more invested in politics because of, the direct implications of it that he sees. And he just starts thinking, well, this is just fucking ridiculous. How are these conversations still being had? Why is so much of this burden falling onto me and all of these things? And all of this anger over really long periods of time, it does take a toll on these people. I mean, particularly Coney and Helga, these are, again, the most obvious examples, is their health just gets ruined by it. I mean, especially Coney. Coney gets some really awful stress and anger-related conditions. And I can't say exactly what because of spoilers, but again, stress and anger does a number on his health, and Helga, I'm not sure of the exact effects yet because I'm only, a smidge over 20k into Beneath the Moon, but it's starting to feel the strain already, and that is not a good sign. Isamu and Hanzo, it's not physical health in the same way. I mean, Hanzo's health does decline a lot over the course of Snakebite, but not because of that. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But with both Isamu and Hanzo, it's more of a mental health thing. Hanzo, does have depression. He struggles with that on and off, and, I suspect he has some PTSD and a couple of other things, quite possibly as well. But over time, Hanzo just gets so bitter. He really does. He gets... And that's not something he had as a young man. He was angry and incompetent and all that, but a lot of it was driven by hope. But again, once he changed role and things got worse, he just gets so bitter about it all. And that's actually kind of hard for me to watch, in a way. And Isamu doesn't get bitter, but he just... Well, I don't know that bitter is the right word, and I don't really want to say depressed either, because that's also not the right word, but he does get, I guess, drained is the word. It's like not exhaustion, it's just like he is just drained. He's frustrated, but he's also just very frustrated, angry, but also just sad as well. It does a number on his mental health, having all this anger lying around, and just, yes, he's an artist and he has his ways of expressing it, but there are certain things that, with the political climate, you can't even say in a song. And that's the stuff that really gets to him, especially when he's trying to keep certain things he does a secret for a lot of people's safety at points. It weighs on him, and it does change him as a man once all's said and done. But then the question becomes, what happens if and when these issues are solved, when these people with this incredible drive succeed? Because at the end of the day, who has the power to stop them? What happens when they do succeed, and all that anger, does it go? Does it get put into a different place? Well, it depends, would be my answer to that. Some of them find a new place to direct that, because, I mean, especially with someone like Hanzo, you know, the incompetence in politics, I mean, that's never going to go away, is it? And with others, maybe they just find something else to do that has less anger in it. But I wanted to particularly mention Curtis and Helga here, because they're not in a position where they can change their roles in the same way. You know, Curtis is, you know, the heir of the Amir dynasty. That is him. He is a king, and he will be king until, you know, either he dies, or should he have heirs of his own, they get old enough to inherit the throne, and he thinks, and he's willing to let them have the throne and abdicate. That is a possibility, but, you know, he's going to be stuck in that role for rather a long time. And Helga being on the leading council of South Yordavik, well, that's just not a role you can give up. I mean, there is no mechanism to do that, you simply cannot. Make of that what you will. None of them have a specific endpoint to that I can see. Some of them because they can't shift from the roles that they're in, and some of them even because, you know, they've solved one thing. You know, with people like this, there's always something else, and even if, you know, they take some time out and do something else, can they ever really leave it alone? Your guess is as good as mine, I would say. But I think that's probably the end for this episode. So before I go on to the usual nonsense that I do, usual sort of housekeeping-y nonsense that I do at the end, again, I just wanted to give another shout out to Patrick Scott. He is Patrick Scott Books on Twitter. I highly, highly recommend giving him a follow. He is one of the loveliest people I've had the privilege to meet, and he's got some good books out that I will link to in the description. Check those out if you like your YA fantasy. But if you're looking for me elsewhere, well, I'm on Twitter as well. That's where you can get semi-live updates on my writing and join my monthly Thrills prompts community and all of those sorts of things. I'm JadeBlack21 on there. If you're looking for the home of the podcast, which you probably are if you're here, where you get advance notice of what the episode for the week is, and soundbite teaser reels and all of that sort of thing, check out Instagram. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. I'm currently experimenting with what I put on there a little bit, so it is very much still the home of the podcast, but I'm also doing more around just indie books in general. So you can see a picture of my indie book, my shelf of indie books that I'm actually looking at right now. And that's on there, and a few other things as well. So Instagram, Jade_Black21 on there. I'm also Jade_Black21 on Pinterest now, where you can see some exclusive art and world building and sort of have a glimpse at what places like Hukai actually look like, with carefully curated images and things like that I've gathered. So that's Pinterest, that's Jade_Black21 on there. And if you are a fellow writer, if you are published or on the way, please do get in touch. I would love to be a part of your journey. You can do that via email. My email is on the screen. There is a list of things I need to know in the description. Please include that in your initial contact. It really does help. A couple of things to note: no age category restrictions, no genre restrictions. It doesn't have to be a novel. Novellas are welcome, anthologies, poetry, whatever you got, bring it in. Let's see what we can do. Indie and self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from. But until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright J Black 2024.